Well, thank you everyone for joining us for the second Scarf Summit. Um, yeah, we had really great feedback from doing the last one, and so we definitely want to continue gathering folks, from our user and customer base, people all over the open source community broadly, and just anyone who has an interest in commercial open source and especially the analytics around commercial open source. A little bit about what we are going to be doing today. Um, I'm going to be, yeah, just a little bit of, welcome and opening remarks before we dive in. And then we are going to have Soham from Weaviate talk to us a bit about how Weaviate is leveraging Scarf and, what kind of processes they are building around Scarf data. Aaron Porter, our VP of Engineering, will then be giving a bit of updates on the latest from our product team, what we've been pushing out over the last few months. We can talk a little bit about what's coming up as well. And then finally, we will have Kevin from Common Room, who will talk a bit about largely just how you can get putting Scarf data into Common Room and really how open source usage data can be thought of as one of many signals that go to market teams might care about, and contextually what folks that use Scarf might be getting by opening up the signals that they look at beyond usage, but into also things like community metrics and things like that. And so for anyone who has been asking about things like common room integrations or ways that you can operationalize Scarf data more broadly, there are good folks here to talk to about that, and we'll also have plenty of time to answer any questions that folks have. A little bit here real quick about just how far Scarf has come and what kinds of metrics that we have been seeing broadly across our user base and just really everything that we are tracking. There's really cool stuff to look at now that we've had another quarter of data come in from the last time that we reported on all of this stuff to the Scarf community broadly. Scarf has been tracking about 3,500 cumulative packages across our entire ecosystem. The interesting thing here with the packages that we are tracking directly is that over time, as Scarf will do more analysis on the dependencies of any given package we are tracking, and that should really broaden the sets of stats that we are looking at across the entire open source community more broadly. We have, let's see, so we're coming up on our first 2,000 cumulative just users on the platform, but the fan out of how much traffic is coming to all these packages has been growing a ton this year. At the beginning of the year, Scarf was doing about 10 million, I was seeing about 10 million unique downloaders of traffic, or sorry, 10 million downloaders of just any artifact on our platform. In Q3 of this year, that became 22.5 million uniques. This is just IP addresses. I'll show a little bit more. But we are now doing about a billion events on Scarf Gateway every single month now. We closed Q3 with over 2.1 billion. If we just zoom out to what that has looked like all time, these numbers are huge. So almost 1.6 million companies that have been tracked using any kind of open source that Scarf is tracking. 8.4 billion total events on Scarf Gateway, and this number is continuing to increase more and more rapidly. And that's from over 45 million unique IP addresses that have been cataloged using and downloading all of the software that is being tracked with Scarf. If we open that up even further to the origin IDs, so just as a reminder for those, Scarf has the notion of endpoint IDs, which are essentially IP addresses, so at the network level. And then we also have origin IDs, which include other identifying headers like user agents. So any individual client on a machine will increase the origin ID count. And so when you look at the total number of clients that have ever connected to Scarf to either download a piece of open source, use a piece of open source, or read about a piece of open source, we have, we're over 86 million of those. And so this is the wealth of data that is available to open source maintainers and open source companies for the first time. And that's a really big deal, right? When Scarf got started for the first time, this is all data that was just simply not accessible to those building open source. And the amount of opportunity that lies in all of this data, as we'll hear about today, can be quite useful from better understanding how your software gets used all the way to commercializing it more effectively and building more sustainable businesses around this kind of software. Um, Other interesting trends that we have been seeing is also I would say a comeback of pure telemetry in open source has been something that we have seen be a very interesting trend since we got started with Scarf 5 years ago, where the technology or really the social dynamics that pushed us to build the technology like Scarf Gateway and our cookieless tracking pixels was really a answer in the open source community to how can we collect this kind of data without phoning home. And that was a big constraint that early on in Scarf's journey seemed very critical to be able to have a lot of the most regulated open source projects ever start to use it. But what we've been seeing is that even you know, any of the most popular open source projects are now wanting to do more telemetry. And so Scarf.js, which is one of our flagship tools to do full-blown phone home telemetry, you're seeing is now being downloaded close to 1.5 million times every week. Huge increase in usage of Scarf.js, huge increase of usage in telemetry more broadly. And that's one of the things that we are seeing is really starting to accelerate the rate of data collection on Scarf's platform and accelerating the ROI that our customers are getting from leveraging all of this data. Yeah, so that's largely what I have. I think overall, I really thank everyone for joining us here. There really historically has not been any one place where people are talking about things related to the business of commercializing open source. But as you'll see today, some of the most popular projects out there and the businesses behind them are starting to rely on this kind of data more and more. And we are the group here, I think, are really at the forefront of establishing these practices and really building out the discipline of of commercializing open source in a data-driven fashion. And that's a very cool trend to be at the forefront of. And so I just want to thank everyone for being here. And we're very excited to hear, any thoughts that you might have to share at the end. We'll have plenty of time for any kind of discussion about anything Scarf related or anything related to commercializing open source that will be a good topic to chat about. So with that said, I now want to introduce Soham from the team at Weaviate, the director of RevOps at Weaviate. I'll let him say a bit more about Weaviate and the project that they are tracking with Scarf. And yeah, Soham, take it away.
Sir, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. Let me
Awesome.
stop the share so you can share. I think you have a presentation, right?
Do. All right. Let's see if you guys can see that. You see my screen okay?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Hey, everyone. My name is Soham from Weaviate. As Avi mentioned, I am the director of RevOps here, which can mean a lot of different things, in a lot of different places, and probably a bit unique to see me here talking about open source and telemetry and tracking. But I think Avi mentioned it best, right? There's really an interesting surge in the open source community of understanding and trying to really capitalize on the commercialization of open source and what that looks like and how to do it effectively. And it's a motion that's happening right in front of our eyes. It's something that's changing every single day, and there's new software and new tools especially with the advent of AI that are making this more exciting and interesting and efficient. And so I consider myself super lucky to be kind of in the crux of all of that. And it makes my job super fun and challenging and intriguing and all those good things. So I'm here to talk a little bit about Weaviate, but mostly about kind of how we leverage Scarf and other tools. And then also here is just a resource for anybody that may need help or have any questions. And I'll stick around after as well. But I have a short couple of slides to go through, and we can go from there. So just a bit about Weaviate, and kind of why we care about open source in a second. I'll get to that, right? But for those who don't know or haven't heard, Weaviate's an open source vector database. We transform all types of unstructured data into actionable insight and power things like semantic search, hybrid search. From its core, we're designed to power AI native applications, and tons of enterprise companies and digital native companies use Weaviate, trust Weaviate for kind of all of their vector database needs. From an open source standpoint, what makes my job really fun and Weaviate a really exciting place to work, in the context of what we all care about here, is we have over 13 million downloads and 10,000 plus GitHub stars. So we have a really entrenched, long-standing history in terms of the open source community. And that makes this a lot more fun and exciting when we talk about kind of commercializing open source data and really starting to understand and use it. So we have a really strong open source community, our Slack community, discourse forum, social media. Internally, we have a dev growth team that is just a super power for what they do and how they've grown this community. And like I said, it's all been kind of paying dividends over time, and this has been started from a long time ago. But that's Weaviate in a nutshell. Quick plug is we have an upcoming webinar for anybody that's thinking about this kind of stuff as well, later this week, and I'll go ahead and share some of those links. But that's Weaviate in a nutshell. So quick kind of precursor on open source and why we care about it. I'm assuming that I'm speaking to people who either are watching this later or here right now that are well versed in the benefits of open source. So I don't think I need to convince anybody here on why open source wins, but just kind of like a quick 30 seconds on Weaviate. We truly believe that open source is going to win in the long term, and that's why our CEO Bob and the rest of our team that was here in the early days 5 years ago decided that one of the first things they would do on the backs of building the actual vector database was to create a community around it and build open source software. Like I mentioned before, we've seen the dividends really grow exponentially over time, both in the sense of how we've been able to help a community of open source developers, but also how those developers have helped influence our product and improve our product. If you look through some of the stars, but also just the forks comments, and building that has happened on top of our open source profile and open source product, it's been super fascinating to see kind of how that's grown. So for anybody that's early days of this stuff, I probably am not in the position to give advice, but I can give you my viewpoint, which is this stuff really, really does pay off in the long term. And I think the flip side of that coin and why we're all here today is it's hard to see that payoff without tools that help commercialize that. And that's kind of what Scarf is really positioning themselves to do in terms of winning this market, from my viewpoint and as an end user, is to kind of leverage that data and show that data. So, the quick 5 seconds on why open source wins for us. Tons of community contributions, like I mentioned, reduces vendor lock-in, right? We compete both with managed products as well as open source products, but at the end of the day, we see and we believe that open source wins because people have the fluidity and flexibility to go build quickly and efficiently and test and iterate and figure out if it's the right tool for them. And it actually takes a lot of the load off of you internally as a team. You're not wasting tons of man hours and services to try to go convince somebody of something. Instead, you're talking to people who have ramped themselves, tested and validated their use cases internally, open source, and it makes your job a lot easier as a seller, as an operator, and overall as a company. And then global accessibility and adoption. We're seeing amazing results. I was blown away. I forgot to mention I've only been at Weaviate for about 6 months, and I was blown away. One of the first meetings I had at Weaviate, one of the first things I did was getting our contract in place for Scarf. And when I got into the data and when I looked at the data, I was blown away with just kind of the volume and overall level of stuff that we had in there, which I'll get to in a second. So that's open source. Kind of the meat here. So I'll try to keep this relatively concise, but if there's any questions at the end, I'm happy to answer. We use Scarf to drive revenue in kind of four real ways. And I think later Kevin from Common Room is going to talk a little bit more in detail and potentially, I don't want to overpromise, show some things on his end. And he's probably the right person to do that. But for full transparency, we also use Common Room, and it's a really, really impactful kind of 1-2 punch with Scarf and Common Room that I'm happy to touch on in more detail if we need to. But the first is actionable developer signals, right? I think this is pretty straightforward for all of you here who have been in Scarf, but if there's anybody here who hasn't or is considering it, you get real-time data on how developers are interacting with your open source product. We have the Scarf pixels installed on several of our open source packages, and we can see by package, by referral source, by date, time, company, tons of breakdowns of unique developers, total downloads, views. It's really kind of the effort you put in is what you're going to get out, and the setup that you create is what you're going to get out. And it's been really, really impactful. And like, candidly, we've really only scratched the surface. I'm sure there's a lot we can do. I work with Dee from the Scarf team on almost a weekly or bi-weekly basis to go through and get that stuff and fine tuned. But even just out of the box, it's been really, really helpful to see what kind of companies are using Weaviate, and then trying to kind of distill and figure out what they're doing. At the end of the day, our motion here is kind of what Avi mentioned, commercializing open source usage. So for us, we're really in this hyper-focused mode of trying to understand what open source usage means for Weaviate, how that translates to enterprise adoption, and at the end of the day, who those users are. And that's kind of like the big mystery and the fun puzzle that we're trying to unpack here. Is we have tons of open source data, and we're trying to figure out what to prioritize, when to prioritize, what signals matter, how to tackle it, with who to tackle it, what viewpoint developers care about. And it's just a ton of experimentation. There's no kind of one size fits all, but that's a bit on the actionable developer signals. Engagement at scale, right? So we basically, one of the biggest challenges in RevOps is kind of trying to identify the right accounts. The old school way of doing this, I don't know how many people on this call are in RevOps or work with RevOps folks, but the old school way of doing this is you create a named account list, you take a bunch of lookalike companies or just kind of a guess. Nobody really wants to say that, but you just put a bunch of accounts in a list, and you go chase after them and assign them to reps and hope something works out and throw a bunch of people and effort at the problem. At the end of the day, what Scarf really does is it unlocks a new demand channel. And I think we obviously did a lot of the investment in our open source product and community, but at the end of the day, you do need a platform that kind of de-anonymizes that for you. And that's where Scarf kind of comes in for us. So Scarf provides the clarity that we need by highlighting the organizations that have those strong adoption signals. So if we see a cluster of downloads, as an example, coming from a specific company, or an increase in API calls, or we've made a change in our end in terms of how our open source package functions, we can actually tie that one-to-one in real time and know that this account is becoming more high value. A BDR should go focus their time on this. A sales rep's key account has spiked in open source usage, and we can go kind of try to unpack and figure that out. In terms of aligned outreach strategies, this is pretty straightforward, but again, not sure how many people here work directly with sellers or are sellers, but we can tailor our outreach strategies based on specific patterns that we're starting to see. And this is where it really starts to get fun. You can unlock by motion, product line, referral source, type of company, industry, Global 2000 versus not, all the different slices and dices of your ICP that you can kind of imagine. You can basically align your outreach strategies based on those patterns that you're seeing. And that's something we're actively kind of working on today. But that alignment really ensures that the messaging is always super relevant and solution driven. At the end of the day, taking a step back, all you're really doing with Scarf data is you're taking product usage data from a new demand source, right? There's been a kind of very quick, but almost feels like old now, introduction of product usage data through things like your own first party data, signups, number of seats, so on and so forth, that you can kind of create instrumentation around. But open source has been historically and still continues to be pretty challenging to try to figure out those metrics because it's open source and it's inherently built that way. But what you can get is some kind of information around the companies that are using you and the trends that you can see on a high level. And something is better than nothing, right? And that's kind of been the eye-opening piece here, is that we would have really had nothing without this kind of visibility. So it's a little bit on the outreach strategies. And then the last is kind of revenue insights, right? Like we're able to really see from a company standpoint, especially, and this is where Common Room comes in for us, but other tools are out there, other methods can be created to kind of go get this visibility. But I think the real unlock happens when you're able to pair this with signals across the board that you care about. Um, Common Room enables things like views, stars, comments, forks on your GitHub um, repo, uh, pixels on your website. If someone visits your pricing page, like all these kinds of things that I'm sure Kevin can describe better than I can later. But you pair that with the open source baseline data, and you start to really get a holistic picture of what your accounts are doing. And at the end of the day, what we all care about, or at least I care about, is buying intent. And buying intent becomes a lot easier to de-anonymize, unpack, and understand when your baseline is there's open source usage. And tying this all together, we're still learning. So we're going and talking to customers who we see tons of open source usage through Scarf. Turns out they're just experimenting and they built a pipeline through one particular team and they wanted to test something out. All good. Now we know, and we have that information that we would not have had otherwise. On the flip side, we're closing deals that have no open source usage, and that's in and of itself a learning opportunity for us. But for the purposes of this kind of conversation and open source in general, we're already seeing the multiple avenues that open source can take, and it's all just about learning for us and talking to the users and doing what's best for the user. And speaking to developers is really, really challenging in and of itself. And I think last Scarf Summit, some people touched on this. But at the end of the day, I think what's resonated most for us is really genuinely caring about their experience when building. And the more we can see about what they're doing open source, the more we can cater to helping them. Whether that's guiding them to the right documentation, helping understand their AI initiatives. Once we get kind of more detail on their open source build, can we actually help optimize it and guide them to the right place? Maybe that's not the right way to be building, but this is all in the name of trying to get them where they need to be as quickly and efficiently as possible. So those are kind of like the four big pillars of Scarf and why it matters for us. And selfishly, I just want to put this out there again. If anybody is in RevOps, worked with RevOps, it's a super fun time to be part of a function like this, because I think 5 years ago, I wouldn't even be talking about any of this stuff, much less working on it internally at Weaviate or any company, because ops was ops and go to market was go to market. But everything's kind of blending into this really interesting combination of let's go win revenue together and do it in the most effective way possible, but let's also go do what's best for the user. And it's really, those two things were kind of things people said, but not always did together. And at least at Weaviate, I can confidently say we're really doing those things in a very seamless and exciting motion. And that comes down to the future of RevOps for me. So, just covering back what we talked about, real-time insights are driving action. Scarf is a major player there, as well as Common Room and several other tools. But we get to see these signals in terms of adoption of our product and open source, and prioritize the right accounts to go talk to them at the right time so that we're helping them with what they need to do. Scarf combined with Common Room really creates that unified customer view, and then pipeline efficiency through signal stacking. At the end of the day, efficiency is super important. We've seen this huge shift, both macro and micro, about companies becoming really efficient in their go-to-market motions. And you can't do that without focusing your reps, BDRs, sellers, entire go-to-market team on the right opportunity, and really minimizing the scope of what they're looking at to be the right things. And focusing our sellers in particular on open source usage has been a really big unlock in our pipeline growth over the last year. So that's everything I had. Like I said, happy to answer questions now, later. Not sure what the format is, Avi, but hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was great. Really appreciate the presentation. We do, I guess I have a question, but we also do have a couple others that have come in that we can
Sure.
get to as well. I mean, maybe first, can you talk a little bit about, in terms of, you mentioned the real-time data helps, drive actionable, helps drive action when certain things have come up. What
Yeah.
has been the most actionable signals that you are seeing from open source usage in particular? I imagine things, especially things like on the Common Room side, if you see people are, doing certain things or engaging with you directly, very strong signal. On the
Yeah.
open source usage side, what signals have proved most actionable for Weaviate in particular?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's three that come to mind, and they're kind of Scarf specific, but I'm sure that's exactly what we want to get into. One is change in funnel stage, right? So I think the way you've defined funnel stages is like pretty clear and straightforward. But the change in funnel stage is very indicative of something going on at the company from what I've seen in Scarf so far, and it's always really helpful to see that almost like GitHub star view to see what's happening within Scarf. And that change in funnel stage is really, really clearly aligned to something interesting happening. So whether they're going from interest to ongoing usage to experimentation, so on and so forth. That's one. The other is actually within the ongoing usage kind of bucket specifically. We have kind of our own internal barometers on what we consider to be kind of like a spike in usage. And that's been really, really interesting for us. This is almost a relative metric to your own book of business and your own TAM, to be able to say, like, is there an open source spike number that actually means a company is floating above the rest in terms of their open source usage? We candidly haven't landed on like a perfect number there, but that's just kind of the framework through which we think, and we're experimenting with alerting around something like that constantly, and it's really helpful to see. And then the third is just the actual net new open source usage in and of itself. So if a company was not using us open source and then they kind of show up, that's super, super helpful. Obviously for us, I think what's kind of unique is we see a lot more enterprises using us open source because we have the options for bring your own cloud and serverless that allow companies that are more digital native to actually build on-prem or on their own cloud. But enterprises need that flexibility to go test and iterate within their own kind of security and compliance sphere. And so the fun thing for me is that you go into Scarf and you just see the best companies for us at Weaviate, and that's inherently because of our kind of setup, product, and what we do. But also, when we see a new name pop up, it tends to be a really exciting and interesting one. And for us, then the game becomes like, how do we go figure out the right person to talk to? And that's where Kevin comes in. Kevin, question.
I was more of just like tacking on to like what we've seen. I would lead marketing at Common Room, by the way, so that's the tie in here. The other thing that we've seen, in addition to your own telemetry from Scarf, is competitive or alternative GitHub repos where someone's using some Apache open source project, and then like your own hosted solution is a different alternative for different use cases. And so like listening in on those is a signal that we pull in on Common Room. We see a lot of open source companies taking advantage of that too. So that would be like just the other thing to add on to the list of plays here. Open source.
That's a really good one.
Yep.
One other question came in. When it comes to the outreach that you're doing, oh, excuse me. Are there particular things that you've seen work better than others when it comes to how to the messaging of said outreach? Like, if you're seeing people use Weaviate, are there particular scripts that you are running through every time? Are you adapting that outreach depending on very particular signals? Can you maybe just talk about the outreach that you are doing on top of this kind of data?
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that really, really resonates, and this goes back to kind of how to talk to developers, at least from my kind of limited experience here, but what we've seen work is not trying to sell off of open source usage. Sounds very common and obvious when I say it, but there's no precedent for that. It doesn't make any sense logically, right? So like you just can't go to a developer who's building open source and say, hey, you should use enterprise, because why? In a world where there's context, and context can look like, to Kevin's point, in Common Room, if you have comments on your GitHub repo from a particular developer at a large company, ingesting that comment into specific outreach is awesome, right? If you can do that, Common Room supports something called Roomy AI snippets, where you can actually kind of like build that context a little bit more at scale. But really, at the end of the day, like, it's not that hard to have a BDR or a seller just kind of look through the context, especially if it's a key account. And really understand, hey, there's a lot of open source usage, but this person's actually commenting and building actively. A lot of times they'll just tell you exactly what they're doing and what they're building. We've had customers and prospects literally tell us in their comments, I'm building a chatbot for our internal team that does XYZ, and I'm having trouble do this, right? So that's one piece. We have a really close tie-in with support. Our support and sales team works really, really well together. And so like having that kind of understanding and barometer to say like, hey, this is like let's loop in support, have them help as much as possible, but everyone keep a pulse on it because this is a really interesting account. We've done that a few times. These are things that don't really scale, but you just do them because they work really, really well, and then you figure out how to scale them later. But those are a couple of things that come to mind, and ultimately just do what's right for the developer, right? They're usually trying to build something. And I think the communication needs to come from that angle. It needs to come with that tone of voice, and it needs to be sincere. even if it's a BDR or a seller reaching out like that, everybody can do that very easily. So.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's something that we are hearing across most of our customers when it comes to doing outreach based on this data. Is that, yeah, I think what may be obvious to some is that coming right off the bat trying to sell something is a pretty ineffective strategy. It tends to be. But just trying to be useful across the different stages of that life cycle with any given account is very, very critical. And the best way to be useful is to really understand where they are and meet
Yeah,
these prospects where they are.
and the
Yeah.
one thing I'll add, right, is like you just can't do that without additional context, and that's where Common Room is really helpful for us. Is that the concept of signal stacking? You need to be able to see what else is going on within an account. That open source usage is. I say this internally, and I say this to anybody that I talk to about this topic. Open source usage is a very, very good baseline. But you look in Scarf or you look at Common Room and you just look at open source usage accounts, and you just see names and usage. But without that extra color to say what else is going on in this account, both externally in terms of news, hiring, what have you, or internally in terms of other product usage signals across different worlds. We've seen accounts where there's competitive GitHub repo activity at the same time as our own GitHub repo activity on two completely different teams within a large enterprise. Like for us, that's a really clear, let's connect the dots and get everybody on the same page here because something is clearly going on. So yeah, Kev.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and add on again. A few reminders, and I think people get hung up on like, oh, what do I say? In fact, like I just made a LinkedIn post about this today and have a slide on it. But there's a few reminders. One is just like you don't need to say anything. Like you don't need to reference the signal. You can just prioritize the account or stack rank the account or what's happening. You don't need to say like, oh, I saw. It's creepy if you say like, hey, I saw that you like start our GitHub repo and also our competitors. Like, what's going on here? The other thing I'd say is that like you don't need to reach out to the person behind the signal. You can reach out above the line and go to like the CTO or the decision maker and say, hey, like looks like there's a bunch of people like doing some sort of project within a repo. I see lots of activity here. Are you aware of this? Like, just want to make sure you're I can be helpful and help you, make the best use of this, project that your team is like initiating here. So you don't have to necessarily like use the signal and reach out to the person is like the 2 points I wanted to add on.
Yeah, as a buyer, I would double down on Kevin. What Kevin said.
Yeah.
It can get like super, super creepy when you're like, oh, I'll just drop this question in the community Slack, and then you get the outreach that obviously wasn't parsed by a human. It feels very, very inorganic.
It's actually almost, I prefer when an account has some sort of signal in the open source world and we don't have specific user information because it's a forcing function to actually go do some thinking about the right way to go approach above and below the line. Ultimately, I guess like to really, really give you the direct answer to your question, Avi, it's like that's the right way to think about it, which is the above, below the line and the concentric circles around the people who are building. Because it all, as always, with any sales motion, it sandwiches in the middle, right? You kind of start above, below, to the left and right, and you ultimately kind of meet somewhere where a conversation has been had. All you're really trying to do is educate the concentric circles around the people that are building to say, hey, there's potentially developers building on Weaviate. Here's what vector databases do. If you're talking to the C level, it's here's how they drive business outcomes. Like those things still stand true and have been part of the software selling motion forever. It's more just the approach and the timing. And right now I see like the renaissance we're going through when it comes to signals is it all comes down to timing and messaging, but not like the core value prop. The core value prop is and always will be kind of the same when it comes to selling anything.
Yeah, could not have said that better myself. I hard agree with that. Well, cool. Thank you again, Soham. That's really really good to see how Weaviate is doing these kinds of motions around open source. And I think before we get on to the next speaker, I think it's a really important point to touch on here that, kind of the why with all of this stuff. And one thing that companies like Weaviate, I think, really highlight here is with the rise of AI right now, I think the criticality that open source succeeds in this space is actually like from a social standpoint, very important. Like a lot of the people on the Scarf team have a background in open source and care a lot about open source. But I think the sustainability question around this has never been more important, really at like a high and systemic level, that open source succeeds within the AI realm, because I think a really closed off ecosystem around AI would be bad in a lot of different dimensions. And so I think all that is to say, and we have, I think I'm looking at the list of attendees here, and there's a lot of representation from other AI companies in open source. And I think this is something that we are seeing over and over again. So I think we are rooting for the success of companies like Weaviate, and really just any open source AI efforts in general. And so seeing the huge broad adoption of Weaviate has been really cool to see. And yeah, we're doing everything we can so that continues. Um, Great. So coming up next, we have our VP of Engineering, Aaron Porter, who's going to share some product updates from us.
Cool. All right, now it's my turn to struggle with the screen share.
Yes.
See if we get this going. All right, that actually looks pretty good. Cool. So yeah, like Avi mentioned, Aaron Porter, VP of Engineering at Scarf. We've really been working for the last couple of quarters at Scarf to make it easier for you guys to filter, fine tune, and operationalize the data at Scarf, whether that's the connection with Common Room, whether that's enhanced data exports, easier data exports, or filtering and feedback. So for I guess I can start off with one tiny little feature. People had asked, and we've now enabled sign in with Google. It's a nice way to tie to corporate governance, get your single sign-on and MFA requirements into Scarf. So
Aaron, the left side of your screen is
oh,
cut off here a little bit. I don't know if that's just me.
I guess that's a multi-monitor thing. Is that
There
better?
we go. Yep.
Yeah, apparently Zoom does not like when a window crosses monitors. All right, today I learned. Um, cool. So for a while now, we've been tagging events with confidence scores, and we've got something that traffic that we recognize as bots, right? This could be web crawlers, this could be malware. For a very long time, we've allowed in your activity to filter out bots into high load confidence results, but we did get requests from some of our customers to actually make that an organization level setting. Oh, sorry, wrong click. The joys of live demos. So we added a filtering section to organizational settings, and today you can come in and you can actually filter out at the org level anything that looks like a web crawler or a bot. We actually don't like this. It's funny. We just had this come up in a meeting today where Avi was frustrated that it had been enabled on our account. Like, we prefer the flexibility of you doing it at the user level and at the query level, but it was a requested feature and we've added it. Another thing that came up was some of our customers are really strong on the ops side, and they run monitoring and uptime checks of the repos that are published through Scarf. It makes tons of sense, right? Scarf is infrastructure for you delivering artifacts to your customers, but that monitoring traffic can be a lot, right? Especially if you're monitoring from multiple regions, it can start to become the largest source of download, and it can even sometimes pollute the results, showing up as like a matched company when it's really the monitoring company itself. So we added the ability to curate a list of user agents that might look like monitoring, and you can now disable those and remove them all. So like in this example, I'm going to exclude all traffic that looks like it came from the Uptime robot service. And that applies globally, and removes all of that monitoring traffic from dashboards. It's a minor thing, but apparently it really made a difference for people. Another thing that we've worked on is to help you allow you to provide feedback on some of the matches that we present to you. It's a fairly common thing, right? We enrich billions of transactions, billions of events. and we use a number of backend sources and enrichment sources, but we don't always get it right. And so we've just added the ability to tell us when we get it wrong. If Microsoft shows up in your activity feed, you're pretty sure that's not right. You can come in and just say, like, don't show me Microsoft. This is bogus. You can also come back and remove it. And alternately, if we get down to the event level, and you think that that an individual event is mismatched. I think we see this come up a lot during onboarding, right? Where you set up your own package, you do a pull yourself, and you recognize that it's not right. We now have the ability. We've given you the ability to come in and curate, and you can say, this download was actually Scarf. Make that association, and we will learn that and apply it going forward. We're going to continue extending this feedback system, and it'll give us the ability to bring your own enrichment sources to things. Maybe you've got your account list, maybe you're sending telemetry that you already know, given a token or key or a pattern, where that data source is coming from. And we'll just continue to add features that allow you to improve the accuracy and usability of the data that Scarf collects for you. All right. The next thing that I want to talk about is our filters. Back in the summer, at the last summit, we mentioned that we had launched filters. But today, I just wanted to walk through a couple of examples of like how you might operationalize those filters or use them to improve the usability of the data that you get in Scarf. So I think as we showed last time, you can come in and you can filter, build queries. Like I only want to see the Fortune 500 companies. I only want to see traffic that originated in California, and dynamically build this list. We've also added the ability to then save these filters. Like one that we've used a lot is what we call our top of funnel query, right? Where we look at a set of industries, mostly technology for us. We restrict the result to people that are further along or kind of in the middle of their funnel stage, right? People that are new but increasing usage, and it lets us filter out people that are ongoing or established to really fine tune, like we just talked about. Filter out traffic that we're pretty sure is web crawlers, and then we look for people that have along their journey hit our pricing page. This allows. I think it's one of Avi's favorite pages to load and share, right? A little bit like a targeted account list.
I check this compulsively all the time, every day.
And then we also once you've applied a filter, filters then impact the data that you export. So if you wanted to export this and pull it into your CRM, if you wanted to build a query and send it to a sales team, all of that can be done. And then and then the saved filters apply across the organization. So it just makes it a lot easier for people to have a shared vision of the truth. I'll go through and just, we can build another example of a filter that might be useful, that shows some of what we're talking about, right? So let's see, we've got, start off with industry. We're gonna, anything in the technology field, and we're talking to people about our new Salesforce integration that we're excited to show off. So I'm going to limit this to customers that have Salesforce in their tech stack. And maybe Avi's going to be at KubeCon in London. And so we might want to look for customers that we would potentially be able to meet in person, and I can restrict that to London. And we can follow this over time. We can look at the matches that show up, and it's just a really useful way for for building this and exporting it. Filters are going to continue to be kind of fundamental to the way that we piece together automations and exports. We're going to be adding company tagging, allowing users to apply arbitrary tags to their to companies and build dashboards off of that. Like I mentioned, filtering influences our data exports. It will then allow you to do things like build qualified account lists for syncing to your CRM, and just a myriad of other applications along this way. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Avi?
Yeah, I mean, I would just underline here that any of these filters that you want to create, you can save them in that filter dialog that Aaron brought up. And then those filters will be available to your whole team with one click. So Aaron can go to that top of funnel filter that I'm checking all the time, and as more and more folks on the team start to look at that filter, we can start to build out workflows around these filter sets. So the fact that they can be shared with your organization is a really important feature here, because this is the stable primitive of what views we want to operationalize. So maybe your marketing team is more focused on top of funnel type activities. Maybe RevOps and sales are looking more in the middle, the bottom of the funnel. And this is giving you a way where you can have stable things that folks on your team are all in sync about which lists are doing what. Yeah, and then I think also something that Aaron pointed out here, but is really worth underlining, is there's a lot of upcoming functionality that will be built on top of filters. So currently today with our Salesforce and CRM integrations, you're largely connecting certain companies in Scarf to the account records in your CRM directly. But one thing that is in progress right now is being able to automatically do that, provided that the company shows up in certain filter sets that you define. And so when it comes to things like creating segments, campaigns, target account lists, all of these things will be getting built on top of these primitives that we've now defined with the filtering functionality. So things like labeling different accounts are coming, and other kinds of automations that will all exist on top of these filters. So a lot of cool things coming up, but there's a lot of functionality right here that is ready to use, and we're starting to see people get a lot of value out of it.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, the next thing I was going to touch on, we've joked internally, is the least flashy demo or least demoable technology that we've built. We've added the ability to connect Scarf to Salesforce. Right now, it is a relatively rudimentary implementation, but you can connect your Salesforce system. We'll pull in your list of accounts, and then we have the ability we enable the ability then to sync and
You're still in your personal org.
Oh, thank you, Avi.
Yeah.
We've added the ability then to map a Scarf surfaced company to a Salesforce account. And then we will push the activity data we collect, funnel stage, monthly uniques, and uniques per package into Salesforce on currently it's a daily schedule. And as we mentioned, we'll be enhancing that with by tying in filters and continuing to extend the data types and data sets that we sync over. And I think the final thing that we were going to talk about was just we also added the ability for users to self-serve, to scale up your monthly tracked companies or seats without having to get on the phone or get on and book a meeting with the Scarf sales team. It's not a very not a very exciting thing to demo, but I'm one of those people that the fewer conversations I have to have with a salesperson, the happier I am. So hopefully that makes Scarf customers a little bit happier as well. Cool. Guess we're into the questions phase.
Any questions with any of this? Okay, well, maybe while we wait, I think the other thing that I can maybe add to some of this. So yeah, when it comes to self-serve plans for Scarf, this is largely applying to, this is on our new starter plan, and what you can do is buy up to 250 monthly tracked companies fully self-serve. For those that need beyond that, that's still on our pricing tier where we do need to get into the mix and talk to you. But for accounts that are on the lower side of volume, it's pretty easy to now just go in, get started, and do your thing. Yeah, do we have any other questions here? Let me see. I guess we did have one question come in earlier about this. Is Nigel from Sistig here? I don't see him. We did get one question, but I guess I'm not exactly sure some part of the spirit of the question. Is there ways to improve our reporting in Scarf to address specific sales requests? I guess I'm trying to see. Well, I think what we can say to answer this question for anyone who's wondering something similar is that generally with the filters that Aaron was showing, you should be able to get to the bottom of most questions that you would want to have. However, it's definitely not something that we have like a full-blown SQL editor inside of Scarf at this point in time. And I'm sure our engineering team is wincing at the idea of having that. However, we will be adding more and more ergonomic ways to query the data however you would like. And of course, you can always export raw event data with a given filter if you want to do more broad analysis of it outside. Other questions that are in here. Can we use Scarf for non-open source stuff? Yeah, you can pretty much put any downloadable artifact behind our gateway, and we can collect telemetry from basically any code that you could collect it with. So a lot of the stuff that we have built our system around is assuming open source, but we can track non-open source as well. Yep. And then, okay, yeah, the last one is just about what other features are coming next year. So I guess a few things that are broadly planned, but this is one of those spots where we also just want to hear from everyone listening as well, if there are particular things that are of most keen interest for you. We are working a lot more on various integrations. So Scarf can be, Scarf data can be pushed out wherever you need it to be. So there's work going into the other CRMs, other MarTech platforms, these kinds of things that is coming up. We have talked to, I think, several of you in this call about pseudo de-anonymization work, so we can get closer and closer to the individuals who are actually doing these downloads and events without actually giving away identity markers that blow our GDPR compliance. That remains an invariant of Scarf's infrastructure and data handling practices to always be GDPR compliant, but kind of pushing the bounds of how useful we can be given that constraint. There's a bunch of like smaller quality of life improvements that are also coming soon. So things like being able to actually configure intent and importance scoring rather at the page level, rather at the artifact level. So currently today, you're only being able to set the importance of a particular pixel or of a particular package, but being able to actually go deeper and more granular and
Almost build a
control.
rules engine around that.
Exactly. Yeah, it is shaping up to be a full-blown rules engine at a certain point. And that rules engine kind of extends to things like, yeah, how is Scarf automatically syncing certain data to a CRM, pushing data out to a platform like Common Room,
Right.
whatever
And
you.
with the filters, like that building on top of that, like the targeted account lists, being able to, trigger like either a CRM sync or a webhook when one of these target companies shows activity or shows a state change. And I think we're also working to, enhance the explanation of some of like the funnel stage and doing more to help the non-technical sales and GTM consumers understand the Scarf signals in like a plain English way.
Yes, 100%. And I think, no, I have nothing to add to that. Yes.
You have lots to add.
Um,
You always have plenty to add.
cool. I'm trying to think if there were any other things that are kind of worth mentioning now. Oh, yeah, the other thing that we have heard a lot of feedback about as well is the desire to have telemetry SDKs in other languages. This is kind of an interesting one in that the mechanisms that certain SDKs have available to automatically report data are different in different programming languages. So the kind of things that we do in Scarf.js with post install hooks, you can't do that in Python, and you can't do that in Ruby, for instance. You can do in other languages though. And so that's another thing for 2025 is just generating SDKs for different languages with whatever functionality the different the package manager environments support, whatever the programming languages support, and make sure that things like automatic opt-in, opt-out are handled for you, so you don't have to worry about some of the intricacies of consent management, package management within Scarf, entity management, and just be able to have a more ergonomic way to just send events up to Scarf in general. And that is about it for the roadmap for 2025 that we're sharing right now. But we will definitely have time at the end if you have other particular feature requests. We would love to talk about them while we are all here. But now it is time to move on to the final speaker of the day. We have Kevin White, who is the head of marketing at one of our close partners, Common Room. I'll let him introduce further. But Kevin, take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. I have my got my headset on now, so hopefully you can hear me clearly. And
Crystal clear.
let me see if I can get this slide share stuff working. Everything looked good. You can see my
Looks great. Yep.
Okay, great. Cool. So yeah, thanks for having me, Scarf team, and also thanks to like a lot of our joint customers like Weaviate for the I don't know if it's a referral or just like the extra love that we're getting. I really enjoy hearing how people are doing these additional use cases with Common Room and Scarf combined. Quick background on myself is I lead the marketing team at Common Room. We'll get into Common Room things later on, but I also have a background in working at leading growth at Segment and leading marketing at Retool, and then advising for a lot of other open source companies. So I don't know how to code, or I don't I'm not technical by trade, but I do somewhat know how to do marketing and go to market for those types of companies. And so hopefully this is helpful and accurate for the group here. But let's get into, and also my talk is kind of more go-to-market oriented. It's like, what do we do with commercial open source or open source for go-to-market? And based on all my experience, I get this question a lot from companies that have like a lot of open source traction, which is, a CEO comes to me and they're like, hey, our open source software is getting like this crazy growth and traction. How do we turn that into revenue? I feel like this is a common pattern, and a lot of times these CEOs and founders are just like, they don't even know we have a commercial offering. They don't know what our brand is. Like, we built this open source software, and like people love it. Like, how do we market ourselves, or how do we go to market the right way? And honestly, most advice out there, in my opinion, is really not. I wouldn't say it's garbage. I mean, the slide is like intentionally hyperbolic, but it is usually non-actionable. It's like, be authentic, turn it to dark mode, speak their language. I feel like all of these things just kind of like fall under the bucket of like, yeah, no duh, I need to do these things. Like, this is just core principles of like how to have empathy for your audience. And it's not like, it's not really practical advice in my point of view. So hopefully the things that I'm sharing through this presentation and demo are somewhat actionable for the group here. Yeah, like this one. This is one thing that someone told me as a CEO. I won't name which one. Is like, how do I get on the front page of Hacker News? I want to get on the front page of Hacker News. It's like, yeah, duh, of course. I get a crack up from that one. Okay, so so what do we do? This kind of begs the question. Like, okay, great. So what's actually actionable? And I I'm a big fan of Charlie Munger. I say, listen to Uncle Charlie. It's like, we've got to fish where the fish are. Also, it's a duh statement, but I think this gets into like how we can take an actionable approach to go to market for open source. And so where are the fish? And I've been following this slide takes a little bit of explanation. So I've been a fan of the show Silo. I think it's on Apple. I think it's on Apple. And so this is the background of Silo. These little holes in the ground are silos. The silos just go down in the ground versus up. So not the best visual, but I wanted to fit in my affinity for the show into the slide. But for the most part, developers, engineering teams are in these channels, specifically like I handpicked these from the sources of signal that we can capture in Common Room. And so the big one here is GitHub, of course, but there's other places where your core audience as a commercial open source offering is hanging. These are the watering holes. But this approach, or this signal is challenging in two ways. One, it's siloed. It's hard to connect the dots between what's happening on X or Twitter versus what's happening in your product versus what's happening in a GitHub repo. And that's something that Common Room can help out with, and I'll get into. And then the other problem, which Scarf helps to solve, and then also Common Room helps to solve as well, is understanding the person behind the signal. And so I have this slide here of, a lot of people are pseudonymous on GitHub in these types of channels. And so to know that, Kaiser Sose here is actually, Victor from Strappy is a friend of mine. And like, this is kind of like the information that we're able to uncover while also staying in GDPR compliance. This is the kind of information that we you need to make these activity happening in these silos and these siloed places actionable. And so this is what Common Room and also what Scarf can help do. And so the general premise for our platform, what we do is three things. There's three pillars to how we can help you take action on these developer dev tooling type signals. One is aggregate buying signals from many, many different sources. We classify it as first party, second party, third party data. You can think of it as account information. You can think of it as contact information. You can also think of it as internal data, what's happening inside of our CRM or inside of our products, and then also external information, like what's happening on all the channels mentioned here. And so what we do really well is ingest all of that signal using APIs, using our own built-in native out of the box kind of products, and pull in signal from these different places. And then the other really, really important factor here is not only do you pull in the signal, but you understand, the person and the account behind the signal, and have really strong identity resolution to know that like this person who is active in this GitHub repo is also the same person or at the same company where their CEO is maybe looking at engaging in a Discord community, or they're maybe that's a bad example. I don't know how many CTOs are in Discord communities, or they're following your competitor on X, or doing something else. And so the ability here to aggregate all the signals and then also identify which accounts and which people within those accounts are partaking in those signals and roll those up into single a single entity, like a user contact profile or an account profile. That's like really hard to do. And that's the type of stuff that, as you're building your software, you don't want to have to like engineer yourself. We've seen people do it before. It becomes like a big mess and nightmare. And so that's the kind of things that Scarf and Common Room can help out with. And then the last pillar here is just like, okay, now that we've combined these two things, we have some sense of signal, we have sense of priority because of the person or the account behind that signal. Then like, what do we do from the go-to-market execution side of things? And I guess we can classify Scarf signals as kind of second-party signals, but this is one area where why we partner so closely with Scarf is we work with a ton of open source software companies, commercial open source companies, and Scarf is really pivotal to providing those really granular signals across
all sorts of usage, both on the open source side and product side, and all the stuff that we've kind of been viewing throughout this summit here. Okay, so then what this looks like in Common Room, and I'm going to demo this. So I know it's like super small to see right now, but what this looks like in terms of like the user experience is something like this. It's a burn down list, like ideal persona plus scarf activity, and you get just a list of people who you can stack rank or list people or accounts you can stack rank and then take action on. And so this kind of like outlines those different pillars of this whole like go to market motion. One is to identify the signal. So scarf signals like events, last seen, funnel stage. These are all things that you can pull into a platform like Common Room. Then there's the aggregation of the person or the account behind the signal. So we have, tagging, enrichment, stuff like that, filters. So you can say like, oh, I want people with 100 or more employees who are a decision maker, like their director level plus, et cetera, and filter by that. And then when you combine those two things, then you can start to take action on the people and the accounts behind the signal. So this is, we can send them to HubSpot. We can add them to an outbound sequence. We can connect with them on LinkedIn. We can prospect other people within that account and reach out to the CTO or the decision maker or whatever. So this is kind of like a view of how we would put all that together. And I'll demo this in the next minute or so. So yeah, speaking of which, let's do it live. Okay. Actually, I don't know if there's any questions or anything that came through. It doesn't look like it, so we can just go straight into demo. Okay, so this is a view of that I was kind of showing the last screen here. You can see that this is any contact with scarf activity. We can see the total number of scarf events. We can see the last time this person was seen from scarf data, and we can see the scarf funnel stage and the experimentation start date. These are all different types of data that's being passed from scarf directly into Common Room. If I click add a filter here and type in scarf, oops, saw that right, scarf, we can see all these different filters, which you can pull in and change and modify and slice and dice in the way that you want to create this prioritized view to follow up with these contacts or these accounts who are identified via scarf, passing data into Common Room, a signal into Common Room, and then start to combine signals or start to prioritize from there. So this is kind of like what this looks like in terms of like how you'd want to filter. Any one of these things could be its own column and its own way to pull in more visibility into what's going on between these people here, these contacts who they've identified with this signal. And then you can also sort or say like add a filter for, let's add a filter for scarf stage. I think that's probably a pretty good one. Scarf funnel stage, and let's do ongoing usage interest. And so we can then now save this as a view for our, we can even add like an owner, deal owner, or like pull in data from your CRM to say, okay, this is your companies within your book of business who have this scarf funnel stage. These are the accounts that you should be focusing on first, because those are the ones that are most likely to convert. And then the other stuff that we do really well in Common Room is you can select any one of these people who we have maybe an email address for, or we know their LinkedIn handle, and add them, take some sort of action from there. So we could send them into a specific sequence of that we've built for our outbound team. We can go to their LinkedIn profile. We can go to their GitHub profile. We can do some of that investigation to follow up in a way that makes sense of, okay, here's what we know about the actions that this person has taken within our repo or within other places, and like how do we follow up with them and give you an easy way to reach out and take action. The other thing I wanted to show, because it yeah, I think I should go back here actually. So the other thing I wanted to show is not only do you have that specific GitHub scarf activity signals that they were pulling into Common Room, there's also like many, actually I should just go here. There's many other signals that we offer, and this is something that Soham was talking about, is like, not only do you want to like understand like what's going on within this GitHub signal, you also want to know the other things that are happening within that account or what that other person is doing. Maybe it's engaging with your sales team. Maybe it's using your product using your product trial. Maybe it's visiting your website. And that's where Common Room can kind of help out and aggregate all these signals together to what we call signal stacking. And so I just wanted to show you the library of signals that we have here. It's everything from, stuff we offer out of the box, like our native signals, like website visits, prospecting, job changes, job listings. These are all things that you can just get out of the box of Common Room, but it's also bringing in all these integrations like LinkedIn, like X, like GitHub, like Slack, or Discord. These are all areas, they're all watering holes where the fish are fishing in, and you can pull that into Common Room as well and kind of like paint the whole picture of the customer and account journey. So let's like take a look at what that would look like in practice. And so here I have a demo instance where we have 55,000 organizations, and this also has that same kind of scarf data. So let's add that as a filter first. Like if you were to drop this 55,000 accounts onto any rep, and you're like, hey, here's accounts that have scarf data, go after it, they'd be like, oh, what am I supposed to do from here? This is overwhelming. I have analysis paralysis. And so like let's filter down to a more workable set of accounts that we want to prioritize. So to do that, we can first apply some scarf signal here. And let's do funnel stage again. We can just say like there's interest, investigation, or ongoing usage. Like these are our later stage funnel signals from scarf. We've got that down to 11,000, still quite a lot of accounts to manage. And so here's maybe where we want to add an additional signal to stack on to prioritize which of these accounts that we should follow up with. And so, or run a play against. And so I'm going to click add a filter here, and I can then say, we could do URL visited. We could do pricing page, for example, as a signal. One that I really like to show that really works for open source companies specifically is a job listings keyword that we offer. So you could use job listing title or job listing keyword. So this one I like because you can get specific of like, oh, does their skill set have Kubernetes, or does it have, the one I like for this is open telemetry. So we have a lot of companies that like to listen in on this repo specifically. And so we can say anyone who's far along the scarf funnel stage and is also active, or is also has an open role with open telemetry in the job rec. These are the 200 accounts or whatever that we can now prioritize and then filter by sort ascending or descending order on whatever level of activity is like most recent or whatever kind of proxy you want to use there. And so from here, I would say, let's create a segment. I can't do this because I'm in demo mode. We can create a segment, which is essentially our word for a play, and say, okay, reps, here are these accounts that you want to prioritize. And then from here, you can click into each of these accounts, or click into each of these accounts. They can do some sort of AI summarization, other fancy stuff that we do out of the box, but they can also see, here's all the contacts that we've identified. Here's their activity across all these different signals that we're aggregating, and just kind of do prioritize account research from there. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to demo is a little bit separate from what we've been showing before. With Scarf data, this is more like open source GitHub signal specific, which is listening in on alternative repos that are maybe from a competitor or some other solution where your solution might be a better approach based on what you're inferring or pulling into Common Room, and then like investigating like what's actually happening there within these accounts. And so from here, we have alternative GitHub engagement. This is a repo that we don't own ourselves, but we're using our access token and our, let me just show you how this works real quick. Within Common Room, you can say add another GitHub signal, and then say either I have admin access or I have a GitHub token, and use your token to listen in on any repo. So this is something that's like super easy to just connect to GitHub and then pull in signal from any repo. So that's what's happening here. And we can say, okay, let's do that same play. I'm going to select multiple people here, and I'm going to add them into Salesforce so that my team can follow up with a specific play, or we can add them directly into an outreach sequence or whatever sequencing tool you're using, all from within Common Room. And so these are some of the plays that we've seen our customers use. Like this in demo environments built off of the actual plays that our customers are running, like Weaviate, like SemGrep, like Temporal. There's a ton of companies that are using Common Room and Scarf together. And so just wanted to share all of this, and hopefully was a helpful demo to kind of like share like what's possible with when you combine signals with stuff like Scarf that's super powerful. So that's it for the demo. I think there was a question here, and there's some other slides too that I wanted to touch on. Question. Oh, it's from Soham. From now we book meetings with companies directly calling out Weaviate on their job listings. Yeah, there you go. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so let's say, okay, there's a little bit more left to cover here. And so let's say you have you've pulled signal in. The first question I always get is like, okay, what plays should my team run now? And so there's a few things that are like, these are tried and true plays. This question was asked in a previous session too. These are tried and true plays that some of our customers are running. And then there's some signal stacking plays below here that we can that we've also seen work. So I don't need to like read through all this. It's just like, triage issues from VIPs in your GitHub repo. If there's more than one contributor in a repo plus they're a VIP, like this is a good play to run. By Scarf funnel stage, I kind of showed that. And then the more fun stuff here is hiring for a specific role. We covered that in the demo. There's GitHub activity plus they visited some sort of like docs page, like that group works really well. And there's high signal there. If there's GitHub activity plus engagement on social channels, like that's also another solid sign that like these accounts or these people are in market for your product. And then the next thing is, okay, I have this play. I'm going to reach out. Like, what should I say? And this is the part where a lot of people get hung up on, and we also kind of hit on in the previous session is, one reminder is you don't need to say anything. You can simply just use that signal to prioritize those accounts. Signal is one way to prioritize where even if you have zero signal, it's better for you to like obviously reach out to the accounts that are showing like some interest, and by chance you might reach out to the right person behind the signal. There is going above the line. So this is like I like to call it multi-threading. It's like there's a bunch of signal happening from practitioners who are obviously like engaged in some sort of initiative around your using your open source product or open source software. How do you reach to the decision maker or the person who should be in the know about that and offer out some help? The other things here are, reach out and offer a tip or help. This is something that we always try and coach up especially our open source software customers, is like, don't reach out in a self-serving way. Be helpful. If you're helpful, you have empathy for the end user, the recipients, like the results will follow. Along those same lines, fix that for them. If you see a bug that's or an issue that's part of the signal of like a GitHub repo signal that we pull in is issues. And so fix that issue, have someone on your engineering team fix that issue, and then report back to them when that issue is fixed or when that bug is squashed. Like that is super reciprocal, and like people will respond to that. If there's a product launch or a feature that you can reach out to and be helpful, like that's another good way to get a meeting booked. And then lastly, if all else fails, send them some cool swag, and that also helps out as well. If anyone sends me a dad hat, I'll pretty much take a meeting. So yeah, and then customers are doing this. SemGrep is like their main way of generating pipeline. Temporal books a lot of meetings from it. Apollo is using it for different reasons. They're finding qualified leads and like fielding and prioritizing marketing awareness that way. Palumi's getting a lot of meetings booked, and then soon we'll have a Weaviate case study here and share some of their success too. So that's all I have. I talk about a lot of this stuff on LinkedIn, and you can try Common Room and do all this stuff for free. We have a 2-week free trial, and it's unlimited in terms of usage from what I shared here. So that is all from my little prezzo and demo, and happy to take any questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was great. Yeah, and I think just to underline there for any Scarf users here that want your data in Common Room, we have a native integration that can pipe all that data in an ongoing way, and feel free to ping us, and we can help you get it set up. One question that we got in advance for this, so when it comes to the signals that are in Common Room, how should people think about basically learning what signals are actually most important? You talked about the signal stacking a lot. How do you think about which ones to really like focus on, and how to prioritize them, and how to incorporate them in a way where there's also just like signal overload sometimes as well? So,
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of which, I'm causing the problem here. But I get asked this question a lot, and I even have like a full-on presentation around it. Um, the quick version of it is I created this because there are many signals. Like there's 100 signals in the sheet that you can reference. Like this helps with like the blank slate problems. Like what do I even start with? Um, then the other place I like to go to is, okay, if there's 100 signals, there's columns here of like how to group the signals. Is it a product signal? Is it a website signal? Is it an open source signal? And you can kind of like group these into these chunks. And so like I feel like this is a good way to understand like what signals matter to me based on my go-to-market motion. Like, do we have a lot of website traffic? Yes, then that is probably a good signal. But do we have an open source offering? Yes, that's probably a good signal. Do we have a self-serve product? No, then like these signals probably don't apply. And so just grouping like what signals maybe apply or don't apply, I've created this infographic for. And then the last thing, I have a lot of tabs here, sorry. The last thing vector to look at is this here. I think this should get to close to 100. Oh, where's the other filter here? 1 second. Okay, so on this tab in the spreadsheet, we have all of these signals in each row. And then there's two things that I like to look at for which signals should you start with. One is the propensity score. And what this means to me is just like the conversion rate. How likely is that if you act on that signal, will it convert to a next step, whether that be a meeting or a reply or whatever your next step is. And so just trying to do like either take inventory of what signals you've already been actioning on, and understanding like, okay, what's the conversion rate for here, or being assumptive of like, okay, we think people who sign up for our product and like they fit this ICP persona is going to be this conversion rate. So mapping that out is really helpful as one dimension. And then the other one is taking inventory on the volume of that signal, like how much frequency does that signal have per week or per month or whatever. And so that'll give you kind of a view of like, okay, we're getting all these high propensity signals, but like the volume is really, really low. And so this will help you prioritize, like we want to find somewhere like in the middle of, the volume of signal plus like the propensity to convert is typically the sweet spot of like where to start, because that's where the opportunity lies. I also created this, well, this is kind of a mess, but if you filter by the signals that are applicable here, you can, I try and start as far to the up and right as possible. So like in this case, it would probably be this like employee of competitor follow signal. And so hopefully this is a helpful resource. I know it's like I've been going over it super quickly here, but to map out these things, click on what's applicable, and then you can kind of see like, okay, which signal should I start with here in this upper right quadrant, which is both combining propensity to convert and then volume of the signal. Like those are the two vectors I'd look at.
very cool. Thank you. That is, I think, a very a very comprehensive answer to that question. If
I
not
get it
one
a
that
lot. I
raises
get it a lot.
lots more
Yeah, yeah.
questions. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, obviously, sorry, I raised my hand, just
Please.
jumping in real quick,
Yeah.
is one of the first things I did when I joined and we had Common Room and Scarf is actually went straight to the sheet that Kevin showed. But at the end of the day, it's kind of, especially as you're starting with lower volume, like you just see what's actually converting to qualified pipeline. I don't know if I missed that somewhere in there, but I think it's kind of like simpler than it needs to be, and the signals actually tend to be really, really simple when it comes to open source usage. And and everybody has a tendency to kind of overthink and overbake these things. The more specific signals are great. The framework through which at least it seems to be working for us is if you want people to source signals with high frequency, the signals need to be a little bit more basic to capture more volume. And the more specific the signals are, and if you stack 3, 4, 5 different criteria, it might hit once a month, and it might be a really, really interesting thing that hits once a month or once a quarter. But you should not be directing people to go spend time digging through that list on a regular basis. But to know what works, see what works, right? Like it's almost kind of like simple in essence, is you just got to try a bunch of things and then see what's actually working in terms of booking meetings. But
Yeah, I have another
Sorry.
slide on this too. Can you see this like chart here?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So to that point, the place I like to start is where you get the highest conversion rate, which is typically like the lowest volume of signal if you're stacking things. And so and then the more broad, the more generic the signal, typically like the more volume they get. And so like I created this chart to show like typically the higher the volume, the higher the converting rate of signal, the lower the volume that you'll see. And then so I always advise people to start here and kind of like work your way backwards. And the job I feel of marketing is to try and generate as many signals as possible so that your sales team is always working in this yellow zone and never going to cold outbound, because cold outbound is like the worst. It's the lowest converting, but the most infinite amount of signal, just because it's like the whole universe of your TAM. And so I just kind of like found that this two by two kind of like dimensional chart is a good way to map out like your signal stacking or signal approach journey.
I really like that framework of working backwards on this. I think that makes a lot of sense, and also just I think very logical given what, the things like demo request is very, very obvious and
Yeah,
easy
this
to kind of
area in the
work
gray is
backwards.
actually like you
Yeah.
could just automate it. You don't need someone to think about it. So I
Right.
have it grayed out, but yeah.
Nice. Well, we are almost right at time. I guess I don't know if anyone had any last final questions before I just say a small piece before we sign off here. Anybody? Okay. Well, I do encourage anyone that has any remaining questions, just jump in our community Slack and we're happy to continue to chat about it the rest of the day. Just another thank you both to Kevin and to Soham for presenting. It's really, really cool to see what you guys are doing with Scarf data, I guess, for Common Room more broadly as well. Yeah, and I just another thank you to all of you for being here. I mean, I think we're at a really interesting time in the journey of open source where it's really jumping that gap from being something that is, something that only a fringe amount of software businesses were doing to something where this is like the default way to build enterprise software and to build software businesses. And I think that, the work that we are doing here and the work that all of you are doing that brought you here are really at the dead center of that movement. And I think a movement that is really, really critical as we make open source the default way to build software businesses, which I think is to the world a very important initiative and movement in general. One last thing, we will be starting to do some like Scarf office hour type sessions where if you need help with any kind of instrumentation or setup, or you have any particular questions, we will be available to do that. So just be on the lookout in your inbox for announcements related to that. And otherwise, I hope you all have a great close to the year, a great holiday season, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everybody. Bye.